The moment Saoirse Whelan heard her name spoken from the altar, she knew the next 60 seconds would either bury her or build her. The cathedral was full. 300 guests in cream and gold, the kind of people who collected influence the way other families collected wine. Her engagement party, her night. The night Rennick Vasara was supposed to slide a ring onto her finger and tell the world she belonged to him. Instead, he was looking at her sister. Saoirse stood at the front of the room in a champagne silk gown, watching her fiancé's hand rest on the small of Melis's back. Melis, 23 years old, Saoirse's only sister. The girl whose hospital bills Saoirse had quietly paid for 2 years after their mother died. "I have to be honest with everyone tonight," Rennick said, his voice carrying through the cathedral microphone like a verdict, "because the truth matters more than the performance." Saoirse's hand didn't tremble. She'd already felt it. 3 weeks of late texts, 2 weeks of him flinching when she touched him, 1 week of her sister refusing to meet her eyes. She'd known. She just hadn't known he'd choose tonight. "Saoirse is a wonderful woman," Rennick continued, and she heard the past tense before he said it. "But love isn't a contract, and I've realized over these past months that my heart has chosen someone else." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Saoirse saw her aunt cover her mouth, saw a cousin pull out her phone, recording, saw Melis lower her eyes the way she always did when she was about to ask for something. "I'm choosing her over you, Saoirse," Rennick said. He turned to her sister. "I'm choosing Melis." 300 faces swung toward Saoirse like a single judgment. She felt it then, the splitting. The before Saoirse who had loved this man, who had built her future around his ambitions, who had given her sister a kidney and her fiancé her trust, that woman cracked open and stepped aside. What stood in her place was older, quieter, sharper. She lifted her glass. She smiled. "Then I'll go with the Mafia boss." The cathedral went silent the way oceans go silent before a wave. Someone laughed nervously, then cut it off. Rennick's mouth opened, closed. His brow furrowed in the way men's brows furrow when they realize the woman they just discarded didn't break the way they'd planned. "Saoirse, what are you?" "Casimir Dravenko," she said, loud enough for every microphone in the room to catch it. "I assume you've heard of him, Rennick. I assume your father has too." She glanced at the senator in the third row who had gone the color of paper. "I'll be his guest at the Ardent Foundation Gala on Saturday. You're all invited to watch." She set her glass down on the nearest table, walked through 300 frozen people, and out into the night air without looking back. "Before you hear what happened next, do me a favor. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll see why one whispered name destroyed 3 empires in a single weekend. Hit the like button, and let's begin." Saoirse Whelan had spent her entire life being useful. Useful to her father, who'd built a publishing house on her mother's family money and her own teenage editing. Useful to Rennick, whose senatorial campaign had run on speeches she'd written at 3 in the morning. Useful to Melis, whose tuition and rent had been quietly subsidized for a decade. She was 29 years old, and she had been background her whole life. The girl who made things work, the girl who stayed late, the girl whose anger, whenever it appeared, was always swallowed with a sip of water and a tighter smile. She'd convinced herself that quiet was a virtue. She'd been wrong. In the back of the black car she'd called from outside the cathedral, Saoirse pressed her forehead against the cool window and let out a single breath. Not a sob, not a scream, a breath like a door closing. The driver, older, gray at the temples, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Where to, Miss Whelan?" "Home." A pause. "And the gala on Saturday? Should I confirm the arrangement?" Saoirse looked up. She had not arranged anything. She had said Casimir Dravenko's name on instinct, dragged it from a place she had buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself it didn't exist. She did not know this driver. She had never seen him before tonight. "What did you say?" The driver met her eyes in the mirror. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. "Mr. Dravenko has been waiting for you to call, Miss Whelan, for 7 years. Saoirse's pulse slammed against her ribs. The car turned onto a road she did not recognize. away from her apartment, away from the city she thought she knew, into a night that had stopped being hers the moment she'd spoken his name aloud. The car drove for 22 minutes in a direction Saoirse had not given. She did not ask the driver to turn around. She did not pull out her phone. She watched the city blur past the window, the bridges lit gold, the river dark beneath them, the towers of the financial district glinting like teeth, and she thought about the last time she had heard the name Kazimir Drovenko spoken in her own voice. She had been 22. She had been someone else. Before Rennick, before the publishing house, before her sister's first surgery and the long, slow years of becoming the family's quiet engine, Saoirse Whelan had once been a violinist. Not a hobbyist, a violinist, the kind whose teachers cried when she played. She had been admitted to the Marivel Conservatory in Vienna at 19 on a full chair. She had played a private recital for a Romanian president at 20. She had been 7 months from her first international tour when her mother collapsed in the kitchen and the doctors said the word malignant and everything Saoirse had built collapsed into a single, simpler equation. Stay. Pay the bills. Hold the family together. Sell the violin if you have to. She had sold the violin. A 1,923 vuillaume, gifted to her by a teacher who had told her, "This instrument has chosen you. Do not betray it." She had betrayed it. Sold it to a private collector in a hotel lobby in Geneva for 94,000 euros, every cent of which had gone into her mother's treatment, her sister's recovery, and the slow rebuilding of a life that had nothing to do with music. The collector's name had been Kazimir Drovenko. He had not haggled. He had not made small talk. He had looked at her across the lobby table, a tall man, dark coat, eyes the color of cold tea, and he had said, "I am not buying this from you, Miss Whelan. I am holding it for you. When you are ready to come back for it, the door will be open." She had laughed, because it was easier than crying. She had taken the money. She had never seen him again. She had built a life that did not contain music, did not contain Vienna, did not contain the woman who had been admitted to Marivel on a full chair. She had become Rennick's fiancée, and Melis's sister, and her father's quiet asset, and she had told herself, year after year, that she had chosen this. That stability was a kind of love, that silence was a kind of peace. Tonight, in a cathedral full of people she had served for a decade, she had been reminded what that kind of peace actually cost. The car slowed. They were not at her apartment. They were in front of a narrow stone building, at the edge of the old quarter 3 stories. No signage. A brass door the color of a sunset that had been rained on 100 times. Saoirse had passed this building 1,000 times in her life, and had never once wondered what was inside it. The driver opened her door. "Where are we?" she asked. "Mr. Drovenko keeps a residence here," the driver said. "He would like to see you, if you are willing. You may go home and the matter will end here. He simply wishes you to know that the door he mentioned is still open." Saoirse stood on the curb in her champagne silk gown, her heels uncertain on the cobblestones, the night air sharp against her bare shoulders. She thought of Rennick at the altar. She thought of Melis lowering her eyes. She thought of a 1,923 vuillaume in a hotel lobby, and a man who had said, "The door will be open." She walked inside. The brass door closed behind her with a sound like a vow. A voice from somewhere above her, calm, low, unhurried, said her name. Saoirse. She looked up. Standing on the staircase, one hand resting on the banister, was a man she had not seen in 7 years and had never stopped remembering. "You're late," Kazimir Drovenko said softly. "But you are not too late." He was older than she remembered. Not in the way men go soft, in the way buildings settle, becoming more themselves over time. The eyes were the same, the coat was the same, the stillness was the same. Saoirse stayed in the foyer, her hand on the banister, her heart doing something complicated. "You had me followed," she said. "I had you watched," Kazimir corrected. "There is a difference. For 7 years. For 7 years, I have known where you were and what you were doing. I have not interfered. I made you a promise in Geneva, and I have kept it. The door has been open. You did not walk through it. That was your right. And tonight? He took 2 steps down the staircase. Slow. Considered. Tonight you spoke my name in a cathedral in front of a senator's son and 300 witnesses. A pause. The faintest trace of something at the corner of his mouth. I assumed you were no longer asking the door to be closed. Saoirse let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I was improvising. I know. I didn't actually. She stopped. Started again. I don't need rescuing, Mr. Dravenko. I have not offered to rescue you. Then what are you offering? He reached the bottom of the staircase. He did not come closer. He stood 3 paces from her, hands at his sides, and the air between them held the weight of 7 years of unanswered questions. I am offering you a week, he said. Saoirse waited. Saturday is the Ardent Foundation Gala. You named it yourself, in front of the man who discarded you, and the cameras that recorded him doing it. By tomorrow morning, every newspaper in this country will know that Saoirse Whelan intends to arrive at the most exclusive event of the year on the arm of Kazimir Drovenko. They will speculate. They will write things. They will make you small in print. His eyes held hers. I am offering you the chance to make them wrong, by being your guest, by being my equal. The word landed in the foyer like a coin dropped on marble. What does that mean? She asked. It means I do not require you to play a role. I do not require gratitude. I do not require you to pretend to be a woman who needs protection, or a woman who is in love with me. You are Saoirse Whelan, who was admitted to the Marvel Conservatory at 19 and who sold a Vuillaume in a hotel lobby because her family needed her more than the world did. That woman does not require an escort. That woman requires a stage. Saoirse felt something hot and unexpected behind her eyes. She blinked it away. And what do you get out of this? That is the correct question. Answer it. Kazimir tilted his head, the way a man tilts his head at a chess move he respects. I have business at the Ardent Gala, he said. Senator Vasara, your former fiancé's father, is the chairman of the foundation board. He has spent a decade laundering political favors through it. I have spent a decade gathering proof. On Saturday, I intend to ensure that proof becomes public. I would prefer to do it with a guest on my arm, whom no one in that room can dismiss. A guest whose presence alone will tell the senator that his son's humiliation of you tonight was the most expensive mistake of his career. Saoirse stared at him. You want to use me. I want to partner with you. There is a difference. Using a person requires that they not understand what is happening. I am telling you exactly what is happening. You may say no, and a car will take you home, and you will never see me again. Or you may say yes, and on Saturday night you will walk into the Ardent Gala, and the world will be reminded of who you actually are. And after Saturday? After Saturday, you decide. The door remains open in either direction. Saoirse looked at him for a long time. There's something else, she said quietly. Something you haven't told me. He did not deny it. There is one more thing, but I will tell you on Friday, not tonight. If I tell you tonight, you will say no for the wrong reasons. If I tell you Friday, you will be ready. That's manipulation. That is timing. She almost smiled. She almost did. Mr. Drovenko. What's my fee? He named a number that would have funded her sister's medical care for the rest of her life, 3 times over. Saoirse Whelan, who had spent 10 years being useful to people who never said thank you, looked the most dangerous man in the country in the eye. I want the Vuillaume back, she said. For the first time that night, Kazimir Drovenko smiled. Miss Whelan, he said. The Vuillaume has been in a climate-controlled vault, waiting for you, since 2018. She did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed in the apartment she had shared with Rennick for 3 years, watching the city wake up through the floor-to-ceiling windows he had insisted on, and she made a list. Not a to-do list. A list of everything she had stopped doing because someone had told her, gently or otherwise, that it was not who she was anymore. Practicing scales at 6 in the morning. Reading in 3 languages. saying no without softening it, wearing red, eating alone in restaurants without checking her phone. The list was 41 items long when she finally stopped writing. She left the apartment at sunrise with one suitcase, her passport, the framed photograph of her mother, and nothing else. She did not leave a note. Rennick would arrive sometime in the next 48 hours to gather his things, and he would find an empty apartment and the engagement ring on the kitchen counter, and he would understand, perhaps for the first time, that she had not been negotiating. The car was waiting. The same driver. Same gray temples. Same eyes. "Good morning, Miss Whelan. What's your name?" "Boden." "Bodan. I would like to know everything about Kazimir Dravenko that I am allowed to know before Saturday." Bodan met her eyes in the mirror. Mr. Dravenko anticipated this request. "There is a file in the seat pocket beside you. He asks only that you read it without his presence, so that you may form your own conclusions." The file was thick. Saoirse read it on the drive to the stone house, and again over coffee, and a third time on a velvet chaise overlooking a courtyard she had not known existed in this city. Kazimir Dravenko was 41 years old. The son of a Ukrainian violinist and a Greek shipping executive, both deceased. He controlled, through a network of holding companies, the second-largest private port operation on the eastern seaboard, 3 banks, a wine estate, and what the file described as interests of a kind that are not enumerated in writing. He had been involved in 2 violent confrontations in 2014, both with men operating illegally through one of his ports. The authorities had not pursued charges. He had funded 6 music conservatories across 3 continents, anonymously, for 15 years. He had never been married. He had no children. He had, on 3 documented occasions, intervened to protect women who had been failed by the legal system in ways the file described in single sentences that Saoirse read twice and then put down because her hands had begun to shake. She closed the file. She thought about who she had spent 10 years building a life with. She thought about who she was about to spend a week building something else with. Neither man was clean. The difference was that one of them had lied to her about it. The 6 days passed like a held breath. Tuesday, a tailor came to the stone house and built a gown around her body, not for her, around her, the way a frame is built, around a painting. Deep emerald silk. No embellishments. The kind of dress that did not ask to be looked at and, for that exact reason, could not be looked away from. Wednesday, a woman named Liesel arrived from Vienna with a wooden case. Inside was the vuillaume. Saoirse held the violin for 9 minutes without playing it, the way one holds a child one has not seen in a long time. And then she tuned it, and then she played a single phrase from the Bach chaconne, and Liesel left the room so that Saoirse could weep in private. Thursday, Boden drove her to a soundproofed room with a single chair. She practiced for 6 hours. Friday morning, Kazimir found her in the courtyard with coffee. "It's Friday," she said. "It is. You said you would tell me the last thing on Friday." He sat down across from her. The light was thin and pale and the kind that made everything feel like it was about to begin. "Serge," he said quietly, "your sister Melis is not in love with Rennick Vasara. She is being blackmailed by his father." The coffee in Saoirse's hand went very still. "What?" "Senator Vasara has been blackmailing your sister for 9 months," Kazimir said. "I can prove it. I will prove it on Saturday, and I needed you to know before we walked into that room because what happens tomorrow is not only about you." She did not speak for a long time. She set her coffee down on the iron table, watched a sparrow land on the rim of the fountain, and felt something inside her chest unmake itself and remake itself in a different shape. "Tell me," she said finally, Kazimir told her. He told her about a private clinic in Lugano where Melis had gone 2 summers ago for what the family had been told was a transplant follow-up appointment. He told her what had actually happened there, what evidence existed, and who had been paid to keep that evidence in a file rather than in a newspaper. He told her how Senator Vasara had used it first to make Melis comply with small things, testimonials, appearances, weekend visits, and then, 8 months ago, with the larger thing. Befriend my son. Win him. Take him from your sister. Do this. And the file disappears. Why? Saoirse whispered. Because Senator Vasara never intended for his son to marry into the Whelan publishing house, Casimir said gently. Your father's archives contain material on 3 of the senator's oldest financial allies. Material your father has been quietly preparing to publish for 2 years. The senator could not allow that book to come out under a daughter-in-law's family name. It was easier to break the engagement, and easier still to break it in a way that destroyed you publicly, so that no one would believe anything your family printed afterward. Saoirse sat in the courtyard, in the thin, pale light, and understood for the first time in her adult life that the things that had happened to her were not random. She had been a piece on a board. So had her sister. So had her father, who did not yet know that the book he had been preparing for 2 years was the reason his eldest daughter had been humiliated in a cathedral the night before. Malis didn't want to, Saoirse said. It was not a question. No. She was trying to protect me, in her own way. She made the wrong choice, but she made it under a kind of pressure most people will never face. Saoirse closed her eyes. She thought about her sister at 16, in the hospital, gray and small under fluorescent light. She thought about herself at 22, signing the surgical consent form because their father had been too undone to hold a pen. She thought about every quiet betrayal of the past 10 months, every flinch, every avoided gaze, and she understood now that her sister had not been gloating. Her sister had been drowning. Does Rennick know? Saoirse asked. No, his father has used him as cleanly as he used your sister. Rennick believes he fell in love. He is a fool, but he is not the architect. And you can prove all of this. By tomorrow night, every guest in that ballroom will have seen the proof, so will every newsroom in the country. The senator has been preparing a coronation. We are going to give him a funeral instead. Saoirse opened her eyes. Casimir. Yes. Why are you doing this? Really. Not the port. Not the favors. Not the 7 years ago Vuillaume in a hotel lobby. Why this? He was quiet for a long moment. Because in 2018, in Geneva, he said, I sat across from a young woman who had just sold the only thing in her life that belonged entirely to her, in order to keep her family alive. And I have spent 7 years trying to build a world in which a woman like that does not have to make that choice again. Saoirse looked at him. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The Ardent Foundation Gala was held every year in the marble rotunda of the old observatory, beneath a domed ceiling painted with constellations. It was the kind of room that made small people feel smaller and large people feel chosen. 1,200 guests, 47 journalists, 4 heads of state, a queen, technically retired but still a queen. And, at a reserved table near the senators, 2 empty chairs. Senator Drosten Vasara had arrived at 7. His son had arrived at 7:15, with Malis Whelan on his arm in a pale blue gown that did not fit her. She had not eaten. She had not spoken. She had been told that her sister would not be attending, that the rumor about Casimir Dravenko was a wounded woman's bluff. At 8:04, the doors at the top of the marble staircase opened. A hush rolled through the rotunda the way weather rolls across a valley. Saoirse Whelan stood at the top of the staircase in deep emerald silk, her hair loose, no jewelry except a single gold pin in the shape of a violin scroll at her collarbone. She wore no smile. She wore no apology. She held a small black case in her left hand. Beside her, in a charcoal suit cut so precisely it looked like a kind of architecture, stood Casimir Dravenko. He did not touch her. He did not need to. They descended the staircase together at the unhurried pace of 2 people who had decided, mutually and without discussion, that the room would wait for them. Senator Vasara, at his table, set down his glass. Rennick, at his table, went the color of a man who had just remembered something he had been trying very hard not to remember. Malis, at his table, finally looked up. Her eyes met Saoirse's across the rotunda. Saoirse nodded once. Malis began to cry, quietly, into her napkin. A photographer near the staircase raised his camera, lowered it, and raised it again. Saoirse and Casimir reached the floor of the rotunda together, and the queen turned in her chair to watch. A woman in a silver gown intercepted them. Saoirse recognized her immediately. Adrienne Calburn, old money, old cruelty. The kind of woman who had made a sport, throughout Saoirse's 20s, of asking after her violin career in the tone one uses to ask after a deceased pet. "Saoirse, darling," Adrienne said. "How brave of you to come." Saoirse smiled. Genuinely. Warmly. "Adrienne, how predictable of you to say so." A small laugh detonated somewhere behind Adrian's left shoulder. "And Mr. Dravenko," Adrian continued, recovering. "What a surprise! I don't recall seeing your name on the guest list." "You wouldn't," Casimir said pleasantly. "I am not on it. I am on the board." Adrian's mouth opened, closed. "Since when?" "Since this morning." Senator Vasara was not informed. "An oversight, I'm sure. The chairman has a great deal on his mind tonight." He inclined his head, took Saoirse lightly by the elbow the first time he had touched her all evening, and steered her past Adrian toward their table. "You're on the board," Saoirse murmured. "I bought my way on this morning. I needed the right to address the room from the dais." "You didn't tell me that part." "I am telling you now." They reached the table. Casimir pulled out her chair. Saoirse sat. She placed the black case on the floor at her feet, not under the table, beside her chair, where it could be seen. Across the rotunda, Senator Vasara was speaking urgently into the ear of his chief of staff. The chief of staff was looking at the case at Saoirse's feet. Saoirse turned to Casimir. "What's in it?" she asked, even though she knew. "What is always in it," he said. "Your reason." She unlatched the case with one hand, just enough that the candlelight caught the curl of varnished spruce inside, just enough that every guest within 30 feet of their table understood, without being told, that Saoirse Whelan had brought a violin to a gala where no violin had been scheduled to be played. A waiter passed. Champagne flutes shimmered. Saoirse picked up her glass and looked, for the first time that night, directly at Rennick. He could not hold her eyes. A bell chimed from the dais. Casimir leaned in, his voice low against Saoirse's ear. "When he finishes," he said, "you will go to the dais. You will play. And while you play, I will hand the proof to the press table. By the time you lower your bow, his career will be over." Saoirse set down her champagne. "Then I'd better play well," she said. Senator Drostan Vasara took the dais at 8:20. He spoke for 11 minutes. He spoke about service, about legacy, about the responsibility of those who had been given much to give back to those who had been given little. He spoke about his son's recent engagement to a remarkable young woman who reminds us that families are built on love, not on ledgers, and a flutter of polite, confused applause moved through the rotunda because a third of the guests had read the cathedral coverage, and a third had heard the rumor, and a third were still trying to understand why Saoirse Whelan was sitting beneath the constellations with a violin case at her feet. Saoirse listened without expression. She had stopped being afraid of him 45 seconds into his speech. Fear, she was learning, was a thing you carried only so long as you did not understand what you were holding. The moment you saw the shape of it clearly, the moment you understood that the senator on the dais was a man who had blackmailed a 23-year-old girl into ruining her sister's life, fear became something else, something closer to clarity, something almost like calm. He finished. He raised his glass. He invited the room to enjoy the evening. The applause was warm. Casimir touched the back of Saoirse's hand once. Not a squeeze. A single point of contact, the way one taps a tuning fork. "Now," he said. Saoirse stood. She picked up the black case. She walked the length of the rotunda toward the dais, and she felt 1,200 pairs of eyes track her like a slow tide. And she did not look at Rennick. And she did not look at her father, who had arrived at some point during the senator's remarks, and was standing very still at the back of the room. And she did not look at Melis, because Melis was the entire reason she could not afford to falter. She climbed the 3 steps to the dais. She set the case on the small table beside the microphone. She opened it. The vuillaume came out of velvet the way a sword comes out of a scabbard. A murmur moved through the room. It was the first thing that had moved through the room without permission all evening. Saoirse stepped to the microphone. She did not adjust it. She spoke into it at the exact height it had been set for the senator, 6 inches too high, and her voice carried clean and unhurried into every corner of the rotunda. "My name is Saoirse Whelan," she said. "Some of you knew me as a fiancée. Some of you knew me as a publisher's daughter. A few of you, a long time ago, knew me as something else. Tonight, with your permission, I would like to be that something else again, for about 4 minutes. After that, Mr. Dravenko has prepared a brief presentation that the press table in particular will find interesting." She did not smile. She lifted the violin to her shoulder. She did not announce the piece. She did not need to. The first 4 notes told the room what was coming. The Bach Chaconne, D minor, the piece her teacher in Vienna had told her. "The day you can play this without flinching, you will be free of every man who ever tried to make you small." She played the opening 4 minutes. She played them better than she had played anything in 7 years. Somewhere in the second minute, Melis stopped breathing into her napkin and sat very still. Somewhere in the third, the queen, the technically retired one, closed her eyes. Somewhere in the fourth, Rennick Vasara understood, with a kind of sick and dawning slowness, that the woman he had publicly discarded 6 nights earlier was not a woman he had ever actually known. While Saoirse played, Kazimir Dravenko walked to the press table. He carried a leather portfolio. He set it down in front of the senior correspondent for the country's largest broadsheet. A second copy went to its main rival. A third to the wire service. A fourth to the broadcast pool. A fifth, and this was the one that drew the first sharp intake of breath, went to the federal prosecutor's office liaison, who was at the gala in a personal capacity, and who within 90 seconds had stopped pretending to be there in a personal capacity. By the time Saoirse lowered her bow, the first 3 pages had been photographed by 4 different phones. By the time she lowered the violin, 2 of those photographs had been sent. By the time she stepped down from the dais, the first wire alert had hit. Senator Drosten Vasara, who had not yet looked at his own phone, was still applauding. He was the only person in the rotunda who did not yet know. The applause was strange. It started in the wrong places. At the press table, where men and women professionally trained not to react were reacting. At the federal prosecutor's table, where a woman in a black suit had stood up and was speaking quietly but rapidly into a phone. At the back of the room, where Saoirse's father had pressed both hands to his mouth and was weeping without sound. Saoirse walked back to her table. She did not bow. She set the vuillaume back into its case, latched it, sat down, and reached for her water glass. Casimir was already seated. Across the rotunda, Senator Vasara's chief of staff was bent over the senator's shoulder, whispering. The senator's expression moved through 3 stages in approximately 4 seconds. Confusion, irritation, and then, as the first phone screen was tilted toward him, a stillness that Saoirse recognized, because she had worn it herself 6 nights earlier, in a cathedral. The senator looked up. He looked at Saoirse. Saoirse looked back. She did not smile. Rennick Vasara stood up. He should not have. Every instinct of self-preservation he possessed should have told him to remain seated. But Rennick had been raised to believe that the right gesture, performed at the right moment, could bend any narrative back toward him. He crossed the rotunda. He did not look at Melis. He left her sitting alone. He stopped 3 feet from Saoirse's chair. "Saoirse." His voice was low, strangled. "Whatever this is, whatever he's told you, we can talk, privately. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I was please. Saoirse set down her water glass. She turned in her chair and looked up at him. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She spoke quietly enough that only the closest 20 tables could hear her, which, in a rotunda full of people who had been straining toward this exact conversation for 7 minutes, was effectively all of them. "Rennick," she said. "Saoirse, please. You are not the worst thing that has happened to me. You are not even the second worst. You are a small, frightened man who did what his father told him to do, and tonight you will find out that your father was a smaller, more frightened man than you ever understood. I will not be sorry for long. Saoirse, I am going to say something now, and I would like you to listen carefully, because it is the last thing I will ever say to you. He waited. The rotunda waited. I forgive you, Saoirse said. Rennick's face did something complicated. It is not because you deserve it, Saoirse continued. It is because carrying what you did would weigh more than it is worth, and I have carried enough things that were not mine. Go sit down, Rennick. Go sit with my sister. She is going to need someone in the next 10 minutes, and she has earned more kindness than you have ever offered her. Try, for once, to be the kind of man who shows up after the cameras stop. He stood there for another moment. Then he turned and walked back across the rotunda, and he sat down beside Melis, and he did not touch her, but he did not leave her alone either. It was, Saoirse thought, the first decent thing she had ever seen him do. It was also too late to matter. The federal prosecutor was crossing the floor now, with two colleagues, moving toward Senator Drosten Vasara's table. Adrian Calburn materialized at Saoirse's elbow. Saoirse, I had no idea. What he did to your sister, it's monstrous. Adrian. Yes? You knew what the senator was holding over my sister 8 months ago. You told 3 people at the Henley benefit in March. One of them told me last Tuesday. Please go away. Adrian went away. A woman Saoirse did not recognize approached the table next. Mid-50s, plain navy dress. No jewelry. She introduced herself as a director at a music foundation Saoirse had assumed, for a decade, would never have any reason to know her name. Miss Whelan, the woman said quietly, when you are ready, when all of this has passed, I would like to talk to you about a chair we have been holding. We never gave up on you. The door has been open in more places than one. Saoirse felt her composure crack for the first time all evening. Thank you, she said. The woman pressed a card into her hand and withdrew. Across the rotunda, Senator Drosten Vasara was being asked, very quietly and very firmly, to step into a side room. He went without protest. He went, in fact, the way men go when they have been preparing in the back of their minds for this exact walk for a very long time. Melis, alone now except for Rennick, lifted her face from her hands and looked across the rotunda at her sister. Saoirse stood up. She crossed the floor. She did not run. She did not rush. She walked to her sister's table the way she had walked to the dais, 1,200 pairs of eyes tracking her like a tide. And when she reached Melis, she did not say anything. She knelt beside her sister's chair, took her sister's face in both hands, and pressed her forehead against Melis's forehead. You are coming home with me tonight, Saoirse whispered. Tonight. Whatever they told you they would do, they cannot do it anymore. He is finished. I have you. I have you. Do you hear me? Melis nodded, her face wet against her sister's. I'm sorry, Melis breathed. I know, Saoirse said. Get up. We're going home. She lifted her sister out of the chair. They walked out of the rotunda together, beneath the painted constellations, past tables of people who had spent 10 years failing to see either of them clearly, and into the night air that had been waiting for them. Behind them, the room finally began to applaud. By 6 in the morning, Saoirse Whelan's name was on the front page of every major publication in the country. By 8, it was on the front page of 3 publications outside it. By 10, the federal prosecutor's office had issued a statement confirming that an investigation into Senator Drosten Vasara had been opened, and that the senator had voluntarily and at his own request surrendered his passport. By noon, Rennick Vasara had resigned from the family foundation, the family law firm, and the governing board of 2 universities. By 2 in the afternoon, a video clip 28 seconds of Saoirse playing the Bach chaconne under a domed ceiling had been viewed 11 million times. Saoirse watched none of it. She slept until 10. She woke up in a guest bedroom in the stone house, in a bed that smelled like clean linen, and she lay there for a long time listening to the unfamiliar quiet of a morning in which no one was waiting for her to be useful. Down the hall, Melis was still asleep. Bowden had collected their father at midnight. He had arrived weeping. He had hugged both of his daughters. He had said, several times, I should have known. I should have known. Saoirse had not corrected him. There would be time, later, to talk about the years of half-knowing and looking away. There would be time for all of it. Today, she was going to drink coffee. She found Casimir in the courtyard. He was reading a newspaper. He had 3 more folded beside him. He did not look like a man who had spent the previous evening dismantling a senator's career. He looked like a man who had finished a long piece of work and was now resting, briefly, before beginning the next. "Good morning," he said, without looking up. "Good morning. Your father is in the kitchen. Bodon is making him an omelette. Your sister is still asleep. Liesel is flying in from Vienna this afternoon. She would like to see Melis as soon as Melis is willing to be seen. Thank you." He set down the paper. "You are not obligated to anything we discussed before the gala. Our agreement was for 1 night. The fee has been transferred. The Vuillaume is yours. The door remains open in either direction. You may go home today. You may go to Vienna. You may go anywhere you like." She sat down across from him. She watched him for a long moment. "Casimir. Yes. You knew, didn't you? In Geneva. In 2018. You hadn't just heard about a young violinist selling an instrument. You had been looking for me." He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was very quiet. "My mother played the Vuillaume," he said. "Before she was my mother. She was a violinist in Kiev in the 70s. The instrument was hers. She sold it in 1989, under circumstances not unlike yours, to keep her family alive when the country she had been born into stopped existing. I spent 20 years trying to find it. I found it in 2018, in the hands of a private collector in Lucerne, who told me he had purchased it from a young woman in Geneva earlier that year. I bought it from him that afternoon. I went looking for the young woman." Saoirse's eyes were wet. "You found her." "I found her. She was 22 years old. She had just buried her mother. She was holding a family together with both hands. I sat across from her in a hotel lobby, and I understood that the instrument was not mine to keep, that it had been hers before it was ever mine to find. And I told her so. And I told her that when she was ready to come back for it, the door would be open. You waited 7 years. I would have waited longer." She reached across the iron table. She took his hand. It was the first time she had touched him, on purpose, since she had walked into the stone house the night of the cathedral. "Casimir," she said, "I am not going home today, and I am not going to Vienna. Not yet. I am going to drink coffee with you, and then I am going to sit with my sister when she wakes up. And then, sometime later, I would like you to ask me to dinner. Not for an arrangement, not for a strategy, just dinner. Like a man who likes a woman." Casimir's hand closed around hers. "Saoirse, yes. I have wanted to ask you to dinner for 7 years. Then ask me next Friday. Friday, Friday." She lifted his hand to her lips briefly, and set it down again, and picked up her coffee. The morning light moved across the courtyard. Somewhere in the city, a senator was answering questions he had spent a decade trying not to answer. And in a courtyard at the edge of the old quarter, Saoirse Whelan, who had been told her entire life to be quiet, to be useful, to be small, was, for the first time in a decade, not afraid of what came next. The weeks after the gala were not soft. The press did not become kinder simply because Saoirse had played the Bach chaconne under a painted sky. The press became interested, which was a more dangerous condition. Reporters camped outside her father's house. A documentary crew offered her 7 figures for exclusive access. A morning show host implied, on air, that the entire affair had been staged. Saoirse refused all of it. She gave one interview, 3 weeks after the gala. To a journalist, she had checked carefully a woman named Verity Aksoy, who had spent 15 years writing about women whose lives had been redirected by other people's ambitions. The interview ran for 6 pages. It did not contain the word revenge. It did not contain the word triumph. It contained the word return 11 times. The phrase that got quoted, afterward, was the one Saoirse had not planned on saying. "I did not go to that gala to destroy a man," she told Verity. "I went to that gala to stop being absent from my own life." It was on t-shirts within a week. She did not approve them. She did not stop them either. She had begun to understand that some things, once said, no longer belonged to the person who had said them, and that this was not always a tragedy. She moved out of the stone house at the end of the second week. She rented a small apartment in a neighborhood she had loved as a teenager, and she filled it with three things: the Vuillaume, her mother's photograph, and books. Malis came with her for the first month, sleeping on a pull-out couch in the living room, and the two of them did not talk much during the days, and they talked a great deal at night. And the things they talked about were the things they had not been allowed to talk about for 10 years. Malis went into therapy. Real therapy, 3 times a week, with a trauma specialist Liesel had recommended. She applied to art school in Lisbon. She got in. She left in late autumn, with one suitcase, and a kind of quiet in her face that Saoirse had not seen since their mother had been alive. Their father sold the publishing house. Not all of it the imprint that had carried their mother's name, he kept. But the rest, the larger commercial body of it, the part that had required him to be a man their mother would not have recognized, he sold, at a price that would let him live comfortably for the rest of his life. He moved into a smaller apartment. He started taking long walks. He began, after 30 years, to read the journals their mother had left behind. He published the book, not the political one. The other one, the manuscript their mother had been working on at the time of her diagnosis, the unfinished one, the one he had kept in a drawer for 9 years because he had not been brave enough to look at it. He finished it. He published it under both their names. It sold modestly. It was reviewed kindly. Saoirse read it in one sitting on a Saturday afternoon and wept at the dedication, which was to her, and which contained 4 words: "For the one who stayed." Casimir asked her to dinner on the Friday she had specified. And on the Friday after that. And on the Friday after that. He did not rush her. He did not perform. He did not, contrary to several rumors that began circulating in certain rooms in certain districts of the city, make any attempt to involve her in the parts of his life that the file Bowden had given her had described in single sentences. Those parts of his life, he told her, would be wound down completely, on a timeline, before any future was discussed. She believed him. She also verified. By the time winter came, she was teaching a master class at the conservatory. 6 students. She had been asked to take 12, and she had refused. 6, she had told the director. 6 is what I can give properly, and I will not give anything improperly again. The director had not argued. The director had, in fact, looked at her the way people looked at her now, not as a woman who had been broken open in public, but as a woman who had decided how she would be put back together and who had done the putting back herself. A year passed. It passed the way years pass when you have stopped trying to make them mean something and have simply begun to live them. She played a recital in March, in a small hall in the city, for an audience of 240 people who had bought tickets quietly and quickly, and without fanfare. She played Bach, and she played a Romanian piece her teacher had loved, and she played, at the end, a short improvisation she had written herself, which a critic in attendance would later describe as the sound of a woman walking into a room she has been locked out of for a decade and discovering the room had been waiting for her. She played in Vienna in May. She played in Lisbon in June, where Malis sat in the 3rd row in a yellow dress and cried through the entire second movement. She did not tour. She had told her new agent that she would play 40 concerts a year, and not one more, and that anyone who could not work within that arrangement was free to find another violinist. The agent had argued briefly, and had then, sensibly, stopped arguing. Senator Drosten Vasara was sentenced in late summer. The sentence was longer than anyone had expected. He did not appeal. Rennick disappeared into a quieter life. He took a position at a small firm in a small city. Saoirse heard about him sometimes, distantly, the way one hears about the weather in a country one has decided not to visit. He had been a chapter, and he had ended. In October, Casimir asked Saoirse to walk with him. The river path, on a Sunday, with the leaves doing what leaves do in October, turning and falling and making the air smell like a thing one remembers from childhood without being able to name. He stopped at a bench they had stopped at before. He did not kneel. He had told her, months earlier, that he would not kneel, that kneeling was a gesture for men who had not done the work of being equals. She had agreed. She had told him that if he ever asked her anything important, she would prefer he ask it standing up, looking her in the eye, the way he had looked at her in a hotel lobby in Geneva. He looked at her now. Saoirse. Yes. I am not going to ask you to marry me yet. I am going to ask you something else first. All right. Will you let me build a house with you? Not for you. With you. A house we choose together. A house with a room for a violin and a room for whatever your sister needs when she comes back from Lisbon, and a room for your father if he ever wants to sleep somewhere that is not his apartment. A house that is ours. And then, in a year, when we have lived in it long enough to know it, I will ask you the other question. Standing up. Looking at you. The way I should have asked you everything from the beginning. Saoirse looked at him for a long time. Casimir. Yes. Yes. He nodded once, the way a man nods whose hopes had finally, after a long time of being held very carefully, been allowed to set themselves down. They walked the rest of the river path in silence. That evening, she sat in her small apartment in the neighborhood she had loved as a teenager. The Vuillaume was on its stand by the window. Her mother's photograph was on the bookshelf, beside the dedication page of her father's book. The lamp was on, the kettle was on. The city outside was settling into its lights. She thought about a cathedral. She thought about 300 people watching her be discarded. She thought about a champagne glass raised toward a man who had thought he was ending her, and a sentence she had spoken not because she had planned it but because something inside her had finally refused to be small. Then I'll go with the Mafia boss. She had not gone with him. She had gone back to a violin she had sold to keep her family alive, back to a girl in Vienna who had been told she would play for kings, back to a self she had agreed, for a long and tired decade, to leave behind. The man had been a door. The going had been hers. If you have made it this far, if you have stayed with Saoirse Whelan from the cathedral to the river path, from the silence to the music, then do one last thing. In the comments, tell me the moment in your own life when you stopped being small, the moment you said the sentence you had been swallowing, the moment the door you had walked past for years finally opened. Because you finally opened it, I will read every one. If this story moved you, share it with the woman in your life who is still waiting for permission she does not need. Subscribe, so the next story finds you. And remember, the people who try to make you small are not the architects of your life. You are, and the door has been open the whole time.